See, the reality is that we are guilty of thinking and acting both as thieves and as owners instead of acting and thinking as stewards. Not only do we steal, but we fail to live generously towards God and towards others with our finances, with our time, with our resources, with our talents. See, when you see that, when that clicks in your heart, you see, when you see that you are a thief, that you've not only stolen from others, but you have robbed God as well, when you see that you are really an unworthy steward who has lived as a thief or as an owner, a selfish owner, instead of as a generous steward, when you see that even though all of that is true, that God still did not withhold his son from you, that instead he sent his son in love for you, not just to live the life that you should have lived as a generous steward, but to pay the penalty that you should have died for being a thief and for a selfish owner. You see, when you see that Jesus did that on your behalf for you in spite of you, what happens is that transforms you like nothing else in the world can. You see, the gospel transforms greedy thieves and selfish owners into generous stewards. Janie Ortland, again, she writes this: we are to be generous because we have experienced the redemptive generosity of God himself. I need you to hear that again. We are to be generous because we have experienced the redemptive generosity of God himself. We are to be like the God that we serve and to represent him well to others. For if all we have is from him and for his use, then we can hold it loosely and share it as he directs, because he is the owner and we are the stewards. You see, when you see how generous God has been to you, what happens is that you will become a radically generous person. When you see how generous God has been to you, you'll become a radically generous person. You see what happens is the question will become not what must you give, but what can you give. You see, the gospel doesn't call us to a life of poverty. Instead, as one pastor I heard this week talked, he said the gospel calls us to be a people who live sufficiently and who give generously. You see, when you see, as 2 Corinthians 8:9 tells us, that Jesus, though he was rich, became poor so that in his poverty you might become rich. You see, the idea of giving generously and sacrificially in light of his generosity towards you becomes laughable. You see how much Jesus has given and how no matter how generous you could possibly be, you could not outgive him. You see, the idea of living generously and sacrificially becomes not just a duty or an obligation, but a joyful response